Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Collect and Structure Your World's Visual Assets with me, SpaceGlitterUnicorn, and
Ashes2Ashes2.
make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's where all of our previous workshops live. And if you need to kind of like go back to this session later on, it will absolutely be uploaded there.
So for the learning objectives of today's sessions, by the end, we hope you learn how to define the visual identity of your game before you actually go into building any of the assets. Identify what to include in your visual concept package, create diagrams of your art pipeline and asset flow, as well as build an initial asset list from your visual concept package.
And on today's agenda, we're going to define the look. Afterwards, we're going to do character and asset design. Environment and level art, we're going to tap into some of that information, UI and HUD elements. Then we're going to look at some technical art guidelines, asset flow charts. It's going to be a lot of information. This is going to be like such a great conversation to have. On today's skills matrix alignment, this basically covers art. It also covers some project management, and it could also cover design. It really is kind of like a broad spectrum because this is designing, this is preparing to create your game, right? And this can cover a whole lot of aspects, but mostly art for today. That's for sure.
I'm actually going to start this off with a question. How would you describe this scene in words? What does this represent to you? What is the world? If this was a game, what kind of game do you think this might be? One of the things we're going to talk about today is like when you're building a visual concept package, you have to remove that vagueness. You have to add more detail to what you are trying to accomplish, right? So if we had just this to work off of, you're right, it's too vague. We don't know what's going on. So that's why we like to start things off by telling the story with our words first. We want to come up with a summary of descriptors, things that'll help illustrate the picture before we even bring a picture into the actual view. So that can look like an aesthetic summary. So like a paragraph that describes the look and tone of the art style that you're going for. There can be visual pillars. And this is my personal favorite, is having like 3 to 5 short descriptors. And if you've seen any of my stuff, it's cozy, hand painted, kind of warm, low poly. I like that look. I tend to stick to that look, but you want to be able to describe it so that you can use it to kind of gauge if something is actually meeting those style metrics. Another thing to write out when you're coming up with a style is to mention, is it 2D? Is it 3D? These are important things that we might kind of gloss over, but it can change the aesthetic. It can change the workflow of a build if we don't call it out early enough. After we do get that summary together, then you can start bringing the pictures back into the scene. And this is where we get to test that, is this still too vague? Those words. So like if you can't find references that match your pillars, then your description is probably still too vague. As an example, if you have a write-up and you says, the room feels like home, like that sounds great. It sounds like a good way to communicate something, except it doesn't really communicate the actual visual style, since home might feel different or look differently depending on who you're asking. So a better way to phrase it might be, feels like the welcoming, cluttered country kitchen of an elderly relative or something like that. That gives a lot more to work with, and you can start to find pieces that actually can visually tell that story. If you don't know different words you can use to communicate style, if you look at a game asset store, a lot of times they'll have a filter that'll help you come up with those terms. So these are some examples here. Like if you type something like cozy low poly, you might get something that looks like that image below it. Same with stylized, hand painted, and realistic. You definitely want to hone in on those specifics because it's going to impact how the rest of your style comes together. You want to match the game type to the art style, right? So maybe if it is one of those adventure games that are trying to be more historically accurate or something like that, realistic might be the thing that you want to use. One of those things I just wanted to call out there. So once you figure out the language, you figure out like what does that art style look like, you have to bring it together somewhere, right? So that's where we're going to talk about mood boards. Mood boards are your friend when you're coming up with your style. You want to find collections of pieces that illustrate the summary that you wrote up. And I say collections because odds are there's not going to be a single image that will do it. However, you don't want to have too big of a collection because then you kind of lose the signal of like, what are you actually going for? Your mood boards can have color palettes as well, and also like lighting. Lighting is another big tool that you can use to really add drama to your assets and your scenes and your environments. So having a reference that kind of like shows you what kind of lighting you're trying to go for is also super helpful. So the images that you're seeing right now are some of my pure refs, and you can do it this way. It's a little cluttered. If you're going to do a mood board that you're going to share with someone else, I highly recommend you add labels. I can look at this and know what I was thinking at the time and why I'm pulling these images together. But if you're using this to, for instance, onboard an artist or something like that, you definitely want to add labels. And if you can like point to the areas that you're actually wanting to pull into the art style of the game, that's also really, really helpful. You have any other tools we could use, Glitter?
I've worked with people that love Canva very, very much. There's this other program that I've seen a lot of people use, Figma.
The mood board is like external image references. And then later on, you're going to have something that's going to be the actual concept. That's going to be more of what your specific game is going to look like. So the external references are like the hints of what your game's going to look like. It might not look exactly like that, but it's going to be the things that are going to add the flavor. And it might be a little clearer of like the difference between a mood board and actual references.
Well, I use the way I use my mood boards is it's kind of like a like if I'm in a restaurant and I have an idea and all I have is a napkin and a pen, that's my mood board. You know, I'm going to scribble scrabble all over the place, like throw everything that, like all my thoughts in there, and then later on I'm going to organize my thoughts in a better form. So, like especially with PureRef, all you need to do is just kind of like copy and paste into it. It's just so easy, right? Like I don't have to do any brain power other than just like scour the internet for the vision that I'm looking for. Cause sometimes
Yeah.
like, yeah, I could draw it out myself, but also there's lots of stuff. Like I need a specific nose. All right, I have to go find that nose. But you know, we'll get into that later.
If you can't find it, yeah, sketches probably wouldn't hurt in that regard. The things that you want to pull reference for, like your environment, your characters, tools, and props. Also, that people probably don't do as often is your UI, because a lot of times people aren't as well versed in creating UI. So find references that will help illustrate the UI. And then where does all of this go? With the competition going on, you have an answer. But I also wanted to call out that there are other approaches to doing the art section, if you will, of a GDD. Some people do try to put it all in the GDD. I do not recommend this because what happens over time, that GDD is going to get so like bloated with information that it's going to be hard to actually find what you need. A better approach is definitely having your aesthetic summary as like a blurb in your GDD and then link out to your external documents that have all the real detail in it. The visual concept package, this is by no means like all the things that can go in it. This is just some of the things we're going over today. So do not feel like these are the only things you have to have in it. Make sure you prioritize what your game needs, not just what we have listed here today. So the sections that we're going to kind of look at are character and asset design, environments and level art, UI and HUD, technical art guidelines, and asset flow. We'll get started with the character and assets. The order that I am presenting this is not necessarily the order that you have to do. This order is probably the order you want to do. For character and assets, you really want to prioritize the largest pieces, and that could be scale, but in this context, I'm more referring to the importance of the piece. So, for example, the character that the player controls. What does the player character look like and how is it moving in the world? That's going to be a super critical piece to your assets and your game. So you want to start there so that if anything in your design is going to require a change in some downstream asset like the environment, that you are able to plan for that ahead of time. This could be NPCs, allies, enemies, neutral characters, anything like that. You typically will see like a character sheet for these characters. However, in pre-production, you do not have to build like character sheets for all your characters. If you've got like 20 characters, you're probably not going to be able to get all of them done for that pre-production. To optimize your pre-production when it comes to characters, I like to do the bookend approach. So you want to start by concepting out your smallest character and your largest character. So that way, everything else just scales between. So that way, you know that the specs that you come up with will work for all your characters. There was a game that was recently launched that had this issue of the tallest character in their game was clipping into different things and the animations looked off. And if I had to guess, is they probably did not have that character design during pre-production so that they could adjust those. And what you find is like if you don't fix or come up with a solution during the pre-production, it becomes a much more expensive fix during production. So, what you see on screen here is how I come up with my characters. And this is the character that I made for a game I'm working on. I gathered references to give me an idea of how I wanted to structure the actual character. I don't have a strength at modeling a full body, so I looked for examples of rigs that were more, friendly for my design style. So I found the head torso rig as a concept, played around with that, and then I was like, I don't wanna just do, like, a full-grown character, I want it to be, like, cute, cozy looking, so I found some inspo for that, and I translated that into the 3D asset you see there. I'm gonna ask Glitter, like, what do you do if you have to have the concept, that middle piece before you go from reference to finished 3D model? Like, how can I bridge that gap? Because that's something I'm not super confident about is my 2D drawing skills. How do you approach concepting when you aren't a strong drawer?
The number one aid is like if you like honestly, not everybody can draw 2D. Like, I'll be honest with you, like for myself, I feel like I'm super sloppy, but I do it anyways. You kind of have to like be fearless when you putting your pen to the paper. With that said, like let's say I'd like to find certain characteristics from different resources, from different references. Like you could absolutely like let's say I like the way this character's nose is. I love that nose. So I'm gonna just kind of like cut that nose out and it's kind of like a collage even, right? And
Mhm.
you can mash them all together in like your favorite photo software. And you can build your character that way, right? You can find different styles, different references. There's tons of different references for like ear style, nose style, mouth, like it's everywhere, right? And there's a lot of artists out there that do like to share their art style in that fashion. So if you find enough resources, if you're fearless in your pen skills, just put it all together. Be resourceful and use your references. There's also AI too, but I highly recommend trying to be hands-on in this process first because you know what you're looking for, right? You can absolutely like present it in a certain way that maybe nobody else has. I would definitely recommend like trying to kit bash your idea from different resources. I love Procreate. Procreate and me are best friends. I do a lot with my iPad, but like if you have any tablet and anything really, use it for your game design, especially your character design.
I think
You're
the
welcome.
part I can sink my teeth into is that idea of, like you said, kit bashing and like collaging the look. I think that's an easier way for me to approach it. I will use that in the next iterations of my avatars. The next piece, again, on the scale of importance, is going to be interactive props. And as you know, those are the things the player can like pick up and move around with, and they get pretty up close and personal with. So they definitely carry a lot of importance, more importance than like a static environment piece that's way off in the distance. They tend to have more art passes because they're going to have different states. They're going to be idle, in use, and then they'll have potentially movable pieces, if not customizable pieces. So that effect kind of like trickles down and extends the scope of your project. So you definitely want to have those on the front end of your planning. In this example I'm showing is Slime Rancher 2. And I like to bring up like ArtStation and the ability to kind of like check out how games were made and who made them, because you realize that it's not the same person who made that interactive prop made the character. These are two separate artists. And then this is an iteration. This is not the original Slime Rancher 1 prop. This was an iteration on that first prop that was done by a whole nother group of artists. The thing that you should learn from other games that do this is their ability to communicate the style and to keep that consistency, and so that it doesn't feel like these are different people. It feels like it was the same hand. And that's one of the important things that you're trying to build into your pre-production package is like what tools do the artists need to be able to keep that consistent look and to give that quality that we're going for. Working with the team, you definitely have to know your skill set.
Environments and level art. I've definitely got to work with a few people in Horizon. Honestly, like after like building your world and building your scene and living in it, it's so rewarding to be able to make that space. And each one is different. First off, I want to kind of like guide you guys in a journey on like different art style types, you know? First one is my favorite is the stylized fantasy. So when you're thinking about stylized fantasy, you're thinking about certain characteristics. For example, you're thinking about exaggerated shapes and proportions, bright and intentional color palettes. So that's where pre-planning your color palette comes into fruition. Then you have hand painted and simplified textures. You're going to focus on mood and readability over realism, right? So like you want to be expressive. It's not just the way the geometry is like laying, that dancy geometry and like over exaggerated geometry. You also want to focus on like, all right, am I in danger right now? And so like your color palette is going to show that, right? Or am I okay to relax? Your color palette can show that too, So really you have to kind of like pay attention to how you're expressing it in all angles, right? And whether it's 2D and 3D. So basically, the questions to ask during planning is what emotions should players feel? What are the key visual motifs? You have mushrooms, crystals, giant trees, magic. And how exaggerated you want your proportions to be. Like for example, for my fairies world, everything is large, right? Because you want to feel like you're a tiny bug. How is that important? The importance is immersion, right? That's definitely a part of communication right there. So asset examples, we're looking at modular cottages. If you have been to my modular asset creation workshop, that is important right there because if you have a modular asset set all planned out, oh, you could bang this whole world out like seriously so efficiently. You can make these worlds efficiently if you have everything planned out accordingly. Fantasy foliage sets is also part of that. Wooden bridges, decorative props like lanterns, banners, and crystals. Now, if we are looking at characteristics for realistic medieval slash dungeon crawler, we're looking at real world materials and proportions. So we're in the real world, so we are regular size, let's say. We're looking at detailed PBR textures, heavy use of modular architecture. That's where the modular assets come to play, which makes everything so efficient. Strong focus on believable construction. So like you're not going to have, I mean, unless you want to have like a building kind of like slanted and not even supported in a certain way. It has to be believable if you're doing realism. So like physics and gravity is really important. Next, questions to ask during pre-planning is how would this structure actually be built? What materials are available in this world? What level of wear and age should be visible? So let's say I made a dungeon crawler, I don't know, in Mars, like, right? I'm not going to use like stuff from Earth. It has to be Martian, right? So it has to be believable. It has to be the materials I would find on that planet or in that biome or world. Let's say everything is bioluminescent. I have to make sure that everything I'm using, all the resources are believable for that environment. So asset examples would be walls, floors, arches. If we're looking at medieval, we're looking at like stone, like really good stone structures, pillars and stairs. That's part of the modular kit, torches and furniture, rubble and damaged decals. So like if you're thinking medieval, you're thinking it could be a scene where everything is like it's rainy and you have mud puddles everywhere. Like you have to kind of like sell that, right? You have to sell that in a certain way that people are like, okay, I feel cold now because like I'm mentally immersed in this. Lastly, we're looking at sci-fi industrial. This one is really popular. If you're looking at the characteristics for a sci-fi scene, you're looking at clean geometric forms, repeating modular systems, technology technology-driven design language. So, like, if you're thinking that, you're thinking about tubes and wiring, LED panels and motherboards, strong use of trim sheets and reusable materials. So, again, modular asset design is really important for all of these, especially if you want to keep the design uniform and keep the design consistent. You're going to want to prepare yourself and be efficient in that way. A question to ask during pre-planning is, who built this facility, right? What's the story? Why are we in space and where are we going? And is the technology sleek? Is it military? Is it worn down? Like, let's say it's an abandoned space station. Like, what happened here? You have to think about like what's the situation and how it happened. What visual language communicates function? The asset examples for this would be wall panel kits, floor, ceiling modules, pipes, vents, and machinery, screens, terminals, and lighting fixtures. And yeah, like honestly, like you can take these guidelines and build any world, right? Gaz Ross said modular design made Derelict 2.0 level design very easy and fast. Pre-planning your sets really, really saves your life. Like, I'm not gonna lie, like going in without pre-planning takes a lot longer for you to achieve what you're looking for rather than pre-planning.
I totally agree. And the modularity of things, it's not just art. I'll just dip into scripting a little bit too. But like when you're building your scripts out and you're coding things, thinking about it in modularity also is helpful. And another area that modularity can be helpful is actually UI and HUD. I've done a lot of UI concepting and building, and I find when I come up with the style of a button, guess what? That button's going to show up in multiple places. So keep that in mind also when you're doing things like a UI and a HUD. For a UI wireframe, this is definitely a little different than just a straight mock-up. A UI wireframe is more low fidelity and it's more focused on function and not necessarily the prettiness of it. So you're figuring out, where do I put my buttons? Where am I going to put the image of whatever asset is in that store? How is it going to function when I click a button? Where does it actually take me? You want to have those things in your wireframes to help communicate how your screens are actually going to interact and move, and then the player can move between them. There's typical screens you're going to see. There's going to be like a title screen, settings, inventory, but I want you to really focus on the screens that are specific for your game. As far as like, if you have a big crafting mechanic, make sure you have a mock-up of what that screen's going to be, how it's going to actually work, because you might find some problems that you'll have to think through and think around to make it functional once you get to the actual production. Specifically with working with scripting of these screens, thing that you cannot go back and fix things as easily if you did not plan it out. You can script yourself into a hole, so definitely plan your screens out just as much as you would any assets. For mockups, I think I've said it in like probably all of my workshops. I use Miro because there's a lot of tools there, but there's Figma, I believe was mentioned earlier. Do you use any other kind of, think you might have mentioned Procreate. Is that possible to use for these kind of like wireframes?
Procreate is fun to doodle, right? I do like Miro because it has all of these items that you can play around with too. Like it's all preset, but really if I want to just draw out my ideas, I just use anything that I can use a pencil with. Procreate is definitely number one.
That is true. I forgot the analog method of sketching, not just digital sketching. I think we shouldn't sleep on that. I have like a sketch pad near me. You could use it for this kind of a situation as well. Going on to the next thing, in your UI, you're also going to be concerned about your HUD. So you have to think about button placement and all those info things that the player needs to know what's going on during your game. The resource that I use to kind of like come up with references of how I can make an overlay look or a specific game screen look, I go to gameuidatabase.com. It's got screenshots of all the different screens and different views of a game, and it's organized. So I can actually search, typing a keyword or use the filters to find exactly what I'm looking for. And that is such a time save that if you have not gotten to explore that page, I super, super highly suggest that you do. The thing you'll notice is the actual HUDs blend in a little bit to the game so it doesn't look like it's like two different things or created by two different people. It still has that cohesion. So don't forget that the cohesion of the game asset world also has to flow into your UI look. The technical art guidelines. So in your technical art guidelines, you want to communicate the limits and the specs for your art team to work within. If you have a draw call limit, if there's any texture size constraints, do you need LODs or level of details for your models? Are there VFX tools that they can use? Does that tool require flipbooks or can they do mesh particles? If you don't know what engine your idea will actually live in to be able to answer these more specifically, then give yourself options. So if it has something that you're familiar with, have an idea for what you're familiar with, and then have like a fallback idea that is something that is applicable to a larger number of engines. There are things that you can plan for even without knowing the engine. The first thing that I think is super important that we sometimes forget to like commit to is the POV of the game. Because POV matters. Is it first person? Is it third person? Isometric, top down, side view? What way are we looking at these assets? The angle that we're going to look at the assets, the distance that we're going to look at the assets is going to inform how we build the assets. If it's going to be super up close and personal, I'm going to add a lot more detail to my assets. If it's going to be really far and almost like tiny, I don't have to commit as much texture size to the detail. So make sure you're calling these things out early. Also, I think we mentioned already 3D versus 2D. There's going to be different needs there, as well as screen orientation. The examples I show here are all portrait mode, but if your game is landscape, maybe that means your environment has to be a lot more spacious so that you can have that open, big feeling. Whereas if it's narrow like this, you can kind of cheat a little bit and you don't have as much area to fill in, if you will. Are there other specs, Glitter, that you feel like you need as an artist to know, like, how much runway you have when you're building out your assets?
I'm looking at this and I'm like, texture size and texture type is definitely important for this. So, like, let's say you have certain assets coming up really close. Like, are you going to like, especially when it comes to camera placement, like your hero pieces? Are you doing like 2D art? Are you doing 3D art, or are you doing pixelated art? Like, that's also really important, especially size and composition of your piece. There, I think this is solid information.
So then let's move on to the color palette. So we already mentioned color palettes when we talked about the mood board, and the mood board is like pictures of the colors. In your tech art guidelines, these are more specific. So we need those hexadecimal codes. I like to use resources to help me find those palettes that work. If you, for example, if you don't have a good idea of what looks good together, there are resources that will help you figure out those palettes. So the example I have here is from now, depending on how you pronounce it, coolest.com is a great place for you to check out palettes. And what I love about it is it gives you the codes as well. You can use this to also plan out what are you going to use your as your primary, secondary accent, and then specifically for UI. You can do all that using this website. On the subject of UIs, I would say in your guidelines, you should also say what your fonts are going to be. So if you have a font that you want to use for your title versus your headers versus your body and your text, you definitely want to have that up front because it sucks to go into production and nobody knows what fonts to use. And so they're using every font under the sun and nothing looks cohesive. So make sure that's in your guidelines.
Being sure that it's legible is super important. Size, like,
Mhm.
honestly, if you're designing for a mobile screen, like, the amount of verbiage on your game is super important too. I will not read an essay on a game, unless there is a voiceover. So it really depends, especially, like, let's say, like, informational stuff, onboarding. It's not so much awesome when it comes to like having to read so much. And font has everything to do with it as well. That communication is super important. So definitely be careful with that. And another thing I would like to know about the color, like contrasting colors sometimes play a really good role, right? Especially like UI versus gameplay in general. You kind of want like the main things to pop. So looking at which colors contrast so that you can have a background scene and a foreground scene. If you have it two blended together, it's kind of hard to see. You kind of want like
Very.
those hero pieces to pop out really nicely. So paying attention to how the colors kind of dance with each other is really nice. Let's say like orange and that kind of like plum purple are really
Mhm.
good contrasting colors. So if you look at those concepts in that way, you can really get far with your kind of like color communication. It's a little tricky, but if like when you know, you're like, ah, okay, I can see this. It pops out. My eyes love it. And so that means everybody else's eyes will love it too.
100%, and actually a perfect segue because for those of us who have eyes that maybe can't pick it up that great, or you might have a blindness to certain colors, the site actually has this great thing that it gives you details of the color palette, including its accessibility. So I highly recommend you check that out. So right now the GIF is showing at the bottom, it'll show you a score of like how well does this palette work on certain color types and how friendly is it for those who are colorblind. So definitely use that. The other thing I love that they give the details for the palettes is the moods that the colors communicate, the psychological impacts of the colors. I love that to help you figure out how to use the colors to communicate emotions. I think the go-tos are like red for danger and like maybe some kind of an orangish color for more warmth and comfort or something like that. But it goes way beyond that. There's parts of the website that it'll help you if you like give it maybe 3 colors you wanna work with, it can actually suggest some other colors that would work within that palette. So super, super, super great tool to use. So now we've gotten ideas for assets, we've gotten ideas for environments, your color codes and engine specs are all written down. So what do you do with that? You go ahead and you start to define your pipeline. So your pipeline is basically how you get your asset from concept to game ready. And this could include any checkpoints, which are not super obvious in this image, but sometimes you have to have review and approval before they actually move on to the next step of creation. There's going to be, which I would consider those kind of like bottlenecks. And there's also going to be dependencies like you can't build one thing before this other thing has been locked in design wise. So you want to make sure you're paying attention to those kind of things and kind of write those out and plan for them. You also want to make sure you understand which tools you plan to use at each stage and if there's any standard naming convention. This is super important for those working in teams to name your assets the same way so that people know what an asset is, where it goes, things like that. I especially like to define the bottlenecks when it comes to project management because if I know that the approval is going to be a bottleneck for my assets, I want to build time in for that, or maybe I want to batch the approvals so that I can get a lot more work off to the next phase when I need it to move forward. If you know that like the character design has to be locked before you can design any of the vehicles, you also want to plan for that because that's going to affect your scheduling, right? The pipeline for sure can be complex like this, but you can also plan to optimize it. And this is where I'll let you in on a secret here. Like, I don't like UV unwrapping. I can do it. I don't like it. So I kind of skip that in my pipeline. I skip that when I'm building to get that look out there as quickly as I can. A lot of times I'm working solo, so I can get away with that. So I'm able to get the look that I'm going for. And if I need to go back, like if I want to start doing an atlas, I can always go back and UV unwrap because a lot of the things I build is low poly, so it's not a big deal. Like that's your pipeline. If that's your pipeline, live in your pipeline truth and make it work for your situation. What is your pipeline? Is it more traditionally like this right here?
So so yes, it is. I'm such a nerd for UV unwrapping, and the reason for that is it's because when you know you're UV unwrapping, you can be super efficient when it comes to atlasing your work. But with that said, there are many resources out there and a few of them that are coming out that it makes UV unwrapping easy. Like there are resources for that, which I don't have a list right now, but maybe later on I can provide that. But honestly, like the importance of UV unwrapping, it all lies down to baking. If you
Mm,
properly UV unwrap things, you can properly bake your stuff. and you could properly atlas your stuff. You can also be efficient with your texturing. So like learning that is pretty important, but like honestly, if it's not part of your pipeline, that's okay too. That's not a big deal, as long as your art works for you.
Yes, usually when I go back, the reason why I go back to do the UV unwrapping and baking to texture is when I need to have like a customizable piece is usually
Yeah.
where I use that asset flowcharts.
We're getting into the nitty-gritty after you have pre-planned your color palettes and your environments and like basically the mood of everything. If you were to put together certain like weapons for your tower defense, if you have a survival game that you're creating for, this is really important. We're going to ask the question of why pre-plan tools and items. And there are three payoffs, and they basically build on each other. The first is planned and built. So before any modeling, you list every tool, every upgrade tier, and every item. It sounds kind of boring, but this step is it kind of kills that mid-project surprise. So like you get the entire scope when you're planning these items. So oh, I forgot the spear needs a binding mesh or a moment that costs you a day. So like basically like if you have certain recipes already pre-planned, you don't have to redo the UVs, you don't have to redo the textures because I want this set to be part of itself. So meaning like I have an axe, a spear, a shovel, anything, and I want that to be part of the same texture map. Pre-planning is important. So knowing your items before you get in and start modeling is key. So second, modeling in families. So once it's all on paper, you start seeing repetition, handles, heads, bindings, the same parts show up across your whole upgrade tree. So you model each one once and reuse it. So that's where modularity comes into mind. Like you want your modular pieces to live in the same universe. And that's basically less geometry, less work, and also less texture and UV mapping as well. So like let's say you want an axe, but you want it to emerge and to be built within your game like at least 4 times in upgrades. You're not going to re-UV that. You're going to maybe retexture it, maybe kind of like make each set its own color-coded theme. So you don't have to rebuild anything. You could just reuse your stuff. So like I said, pre-plan your objects, right? So thirdly, you're going to atlas with intent. So because those materials repeat the same wood, the same iron, you can lay out one texture atlas up and basically unwrap every mesh into it. So you're sharing the same texture map. And with that said, you're going to use one sheet instead of 15 sheets. That's a huge win for performance and for keeping your project tidy. Planning it out like within a flowchart, a tree is going to help you if like with efficiency. At this point, now we're looking at 4 steps. So first off, now we're going to list in tiers. So let's say you have like 3 tiers within the game. First tier is like 5 maps, and the next tier is the same in the next, right? You're going to have a weapon set or a recipe set for each one. So thinking in tiers, thinking in sections is really important for pre-planning. So step one would be the list in tiers. So your planning doc, write out every tool, every upgrade tier, and recipe items each one needs. Step two is breaking it into parts. So look at each item, split it into reusable submeshes, handle, head, blade, binding. This is where you spot what's shared, right? Step three is your model kit. Build each unique part one time. Then you assemble your tiers by swapping and combining those parts. A stone axe, a steel axe might share the same exact handle. Step four is pack the atlas. So group the shared materials onto one UV atlas and unwrap each mesh into it. It sounds like a lot, but really, like once you have it on paper, you're going to be like, oh, I see that. We're going to look at this one item right now. It's an axe, right? And it has 3 upgrades. And if you play Valheim like I play Valheim, you know the vibes. This is basically it right here. Let's say you're new to the world and you need items that are accessible just by picking up, right? And so I'm in the world and I have wood, but the wood is not by chopping it down because I don't have an axe. I don't have a stone pick to break apart stone or fiber, fibers I can find. I need to be able to access these items without having to do anything but find them, right? And that's where this first tier comes in. So I'm gonna gather little twigs and sticks for the wood. I'm going to go by the riverside and find some stone. I'll go to like some tall grass, and that would be my resource to basically put together this first tier axe, right? Boom. That's it. Now I could start chopping trees like a madwoman. So level 2. Now that I can do all of that, I can start like resourcing for iron, right? That's where like your whole modular set, your whole tool set really comes to play. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So here is an entire list of like, let's say tier 1 of my game map. Tier 1 is like the stone age of my game, right? And this is the tool set I need to survive this stone age. Because if you're thinking about enemies, if you're thinking about resources that are accessible in this group of worlds, you're going to think this set. So each set is going to correspond with each biome, right? Right now I am in the happy land where I am not going to really die. I can survive, but I know I'm going to need better tools for the next biome coming up. But these are the ones that help me survive in this one. Let's take a look. You have your axe, your pickaxe, your knife, and your sphere. So my axe, of course, I can chop down trees. I can chop down some enemies. My pickaxe is for gathering stone and ore. My knife is definitely for defending myself or maybe gathering food. And then the spear is also to defend myself and attack the baddies at a distance. With that said, having this all mapped out is really important because before you even start modeling anything, you want to make sure that all of these items have their own corresponding texture maps. If not, you're going back and forth. Being efficient with this is so important and it will save your life. It doesn't have to be this detailed, but in my experience, like especially with the types of games I like to play, it does take this much and maybe even more. I just have a quick PRF I want to show off really quick. So after you've planned out your items, now we have to kind of like go back to everything we've learned previously and we have to think color palette. We have to think, all right, where do these items live? Is it medieval? Is it sci-fi? Is it realistic? Let's say I've designed the list and I want to give it off to an artist to do this stuff for me. So how do I communicate that? You communicate it by gathering resources, gathering your references as such. Let's say I want my stone items to look as such. I list the stone items, I list the recipe items and really kind of like break it down. That way communication is on par and everybody knows what they're doing. And so having it all laid down on paper will really help you with efficiency and timing.
I
What do you
really like
think?
I think this is great. Like, I'm ready to build this game because, like, you got it
Yeah.
all mapped out, you got it all planned out. Yes, there's gonna be UV unwrapping because we're efficient. We are gonna atlas this out so we can have some shared textures going on. We're at QA right now.
Based on your experience, on how many colors do you recommend to get a good color palette? I know this question can be a little vague, and sometimes little colors can be enough. So it really depends. Like realistic, of course, you have a broad spectrum of colors, right? You have, world colors. However, having with that said, you also kind of want pops of color. Like let's say you have a whole world and you have trees, you have grass, all natural elements. Sometimes pops of colors will be nice. So let's say I'm in a kingdom where like there are purple flags and gold trimmings and stuff like that. I would say don't overdo it with the colors. Like have your royal colors there to represent that scene. Game where it's only pastel colors, I would say 5 to 6 colors. Stick with those and you're guaranteed to have like a good kind of like color scene for that, like like cell shading and minimalistic, if you get what I'm saying. So it really depends, like honestly, but trying to do too much, you'll know when it's too much, right? You'll just know. But also what's important is style. If you're trying to put in some stylized painting items with some realistic items like together, that doesn't look right. It looks like, all right, you kind of pulled this from different places and you didn't try, you know. So that's also important. And so for a concept package with character environment, what's the best balance? Rough sketches, AI renders, actually building out example assets. So I've pretty much worked with a lot of these. Like sometimes if you absolutely know what you're looking for, sketches are really helpful. But also, you know, resourcing AI, especially if you're really good at communicating with the AI to pull exactly what you want, that can help too. You can basically get something that maybe you're not able to concept yourself with a pen and paper. And also actually building out example assets. That sometimes helps as well. And I'll tell you a trick. Sometimes, like let's say you build out something that is like gray boxed and then render it out as an image, drawing on top of that is a good way to really get the scale of what you're working with, right? And also like then you can really play out around with color and stuff. I I I'm such a I'm so weird. So sometimes, like, let's say I want to rearrange my room or something, and this is you could use this for anything, right? I can build it out as a gray box and kind of like, let's say I want to play around with like the color of the wall or the color of the bedding or whatever. I could take that 3D image of it rearranged and I could color right on top of it, doodle all my ideas. So you could do the same concept with a game. You could do the same concept with your artwork. There's a lot of 2D artists that actually build out in Blender. And then what they do is they render it out and draw right on top of it. You can also map out lighting that way too, which is super cool. So yeah, I like that third option. And this is for you, Ash.
Okay. For the UI and HUD, do we have to design our own concept from scratch or we have to include just image references? I think the competition refers the UI wireframes. I think you're going to probably want to do that yourself because the whole point of creating these packages is to communicate your ability to design and problem solve. So if it's just references, they don't get to see your thought process unless it's like the perfect reference, which again, odds are you're not going to find the perfect reference. So if you can, don't be afraid to just sketch it out. Like I said, pencil and paper is fine. Sketch it out. Wireframe is less about like artistic ability, more about function and placement. Hopefully that answers that question for you. Thank you so much. Any other last thoughts, Glitter?
You're all awesome. And I can't wait to see your games. And that's it. Keep being
Have a
creative, guys.
yes, have a great day and we'll see you the next time. Goodbye.